Hello and welcome to those tuning into today's webinar. My name is Jess Mutton from GECA, Good Environmental Choice Australia. So today's webinar is about highlighting opportunities for corporate businesses to turn its travel procurement into sustainable procurement and ultimately align to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This includes Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, and Goal 12, Responsible Consumption and Production. So firstly, what is sustainable procurement? So sustainable procurement is more than simply looking at environmental impact. It's also about moving far beyond tokenistic gestures. The International Organization for Standardization, ISO, defines sustainable procurement as procurement that has the most positive environmental, social, and economic impacts possible over the entire life cycle of the product or service. So today, to learn some more, we have Kate Reid joining us from City of Sydney to tell us about what the Council is doing to support corporate businesses wanting to procure sustainable accommodation and event venues. Kate is a Sustainability Engagement Coordinator at City of Sydney, supporting delivery of the city's 5-year strategic plan to make Sydney a sustainable destination. So welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Jess.
So Kate, could you please give us some context on what led City of Sydney to focus on the accommodation and event sector?
Well, it goes back some time ago when we went out to our residential and business community and asked them what they wanted us to prioritise as projects as a local government, and we expect them to come back to us and say things like fix that local park or sort out the potholes in the roads. And they did come back with a really long list of that kind of stuff. But they also came back with really big asks. They came back saying to us, we want to be a globally competitive and innovative city. We want to be a city that takes action on climate. We want to have housing that's affordable and equitable for a diverse population. So they came back with really big asks as well. And that's when we set the Sustainable Sydney 2030 vision for our city. And that's got really ambitious environmental targets in it. So it's got a carbon emissions target to reduce emissions by 70% by 2030. And it also talks about, we've also set in a target to reduce emissions to the point that we have net zero emissions by 2050. So at last count, emissions were down by 21%, which is fantastic. And that's work that's been done by ourselves, but also other players and leaders across the city. But we're still left with 49% to be tackled over the next 12 years. We've all seen what's been happening with the bushfires and smoke around the country this year, and globally climate impacts are escalating. We've recently joined over 1,000 other government jurisdictions calling a climate emergency, and that means we recognise that climate change poses a serious risk and needs to be treated as a national emergency. So it's incumbent on us all to act. And when we looked at, we've done a lot of work with commercial office buildings, and incredible emissions have been saved in that particular sector. So the leaders in the office space in our local government area have more than halved their emissions in the last 6-7 years. We know that accommodation and event venues are the second biggest contributor in terms of impacts in our city. So we did a whole bunch of consultation directly with hotels and entertainment venues, and also with peak bodies like Tourism Accommodation Australia, government agencies, to find out kind of what the opportunities were. And out of that work has come the Making Sydney a Sustainable Destination plan, which is a 5-year plan around tackling the impacts in the tourism sector in our city.
Sounds like the tourism sector has quite a big impact there.
It does. So obviously our natural environment in Sydney is an amazing benefit. We've got a beautiful harbour, we've got incredible beaches and gorgeous city parks, and visitors have a really memorable experience here. Sydney is one of the most coveted destinations in the world, but all that visiting has an environmental cost. So if we just look at hotels for a second, the Global Hotel Industry Group International Tourism Partnership estimates that the hotel sector needs to reduce its emissions by 60% by 2030, just to play its role as a sector in meeting the Paris targets. And there's so much opportunity in this space. There's a lot of opportunities to reduce water consumption, also waste impacts, without having any negative effect on guest comfort.
Definitely. And so what kind of actions are these venues taking to address this?
Well, this slide here is our fabulous leaders group. So these are over 30 of the hotel and entertainment venue leaders in our local government area, and they're doing incredible work. So they've already reduced in 1 year emissions across that group by 5%. They're tackling really tricky problems like the amount of food waste that happens in some of those operations. They're looking at how to incorporate green energy into their energy use, and they're working together. So we act as a secretariat for this group. They come together every 4 months to look at what best practice is happening across their group, and they learn from each other. So the leaders group is doing great stuff, but to move the sector as a whole and faster, we kind of need corporates and government to be demanding more in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, right. And I guess it sounds like there's a strong role for procurement here. So, for example, for companies looking to choose hotels that align with their corporate sustainability values or, sustainable development goals, aspirations, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, so the leaders will always be ahead of the pack, but to move the sector as a whole, as I said, when we went out to speak to the venues, some of them are still saying, look, we will prioritise this stuff when our guests ask for it. So we're looking at the sustainability opportunities for this sector as a bit of a supply and demand issue. It's a systems issue. So on the supply side, we are working with those leaders, and they're taking great strides forward. We're building capacity across the sector, so we offer grants and funding for venues to get things like energy audits or to have technology put in their building to make them more efficient. We're activating upgrades, so we've got an engineer on board who will go into venues and help venues understand how to tune their building and optimise what they're doing. We're recognising and promoting the leaders, so we're sponsoring awards, for example, for the most sustainable venues. We're also telling that story out there about the cost savings that buildings can make by implementing some of these sustainability initiatives. But we're also looking at the demand side of things. So we are saying to procurers of travel, when you're going out and you're doing your request for tenders for hotels or event venues, tell them that you want to see sustainability from them. And a simple way to get that is to ask them to get a third-party accredited rating.
I guess just before going into the ratings, what about travellers? We know, I guess, that there's many travellers that want to travel sustainably, but aren't really sure what questions to ask or how to assess which hotels are doing the right thing. And I guess that's where, third-party certification and things come in. Where do you see that heading, and how City of Sydney are working with that?
Yeah, sure. So all the surveys are saying the same thing. The surveys are saying that travellers do want to travel sustainably. So Booking.com said when they surveyed all their travellers, 87% of them were saying they wanted to travel sustainably. Hilton surveyed 72,000 of their guests, and they found that a third of them want to travel sustainably. The issue is that travellers don't know the questions to ask, or when they're traveling, they're not wanting to spend a whole lot of research understanding how sustainable their hotel or event venue is. And that's where third-party ratings can do such a great job at simplifying that picture for a traveller or a guest.
Yeah, right. Yes, I definitely agree. And I guess coming from GECA, we're well aware of how that helps, third-party ratings and certifications, and we do that, I guess, quite a bit through our eco-labelling. So we're quite aware of how, I guess, many procurers use that, and it quite often comes as, a mark of trust, something that's credible and transparent, and it makes that, procurement of sustainability quite easy then.
So we're saying to procurers of travel, when you're choosing a hotel or event venue, use the third-party accredited ratings that are out there in Australia you can trust them. They're robust. They're based on performance. They enable operators and owners of buildings to benchmark how they're going and set their sustainability journey to improve. We know that certifications and ratings drive improvement. So in the commercial office building sector, which has been using, for example, the NABERS rating for many, many years, they report an average improvement in emissions of 11.5%. So they're cutting their emissions by 11.5%, because once a building owner or operator understands how they compare to similar buildings, they have a tool, it's an operational tool to have those internal conversations about how they can improve and how they can cut their impact. Ratings and certifications force an operation to look holistically at their environmental performance and put a place in plan to improve it over time. And it's simple, it makes it simple for procurement managers and procurement teams that are trying to choose responsibly when it comes to selecting hotels for the year for their staff.
Excellent. And so from the work you've done, what do you feel are the steps for an organisation to shift their policy and procurement in corporate sustainable decision making into choosing hotels or event venues? What other tools are available?
Sure. So the first thing, I guess, is to look at your travel policy. So at City of Sydney, we've actually amended our travel policy so that staff are required to preference rated hotels where a hotel fits certain other criteria, for example, cost criteria. So we've worked really closely with our travel management company to make that possible. Once you've amended your policy so that staff preference rated hotels, you can start to ramp that up over time. The reality at the moment is there's not many accommodation ratings in the market. As I said before, hotels are saying we will get this when our guests ask for it. So in the first instance, have those conversations with your hotel suppliers. Tell them that this is important to you. Tell them that you're going to be building environmental ratings into your procurement over time, and then ramp that up. So in your next request for tender, include the question, find out which of them are getting these ratings, and the following year you can make it mandatory. And you can say, we will only stay in your hotel or event venue. We will only book your event venue if you're accredited with one of these ratings certifications.
For the people listening today who are keen to follow Sydney's lead, Kate, do you have other guidance for them on implementing the change you're advocating?
Yeah, so we've developed a really simple procuring sustainable accommodation guide, which you can find in the resources section of the Sustainable Destination Partnership site, or reach out to us anytime for a chat. We're really happy across the team to talk to you about how you can build in these kind of procurement requirements over time. And it will be different for each business, and it's not one size fits all, but what we have done is kind of chart a bit of a suggested trajectory to build it into your procurement.
Excellent. Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Kate, and congratulations to you and your team and the, City of Sydney for the work that you're doing in this space. If you are interested, for those listening, in reaching out to Kate, please use the contact details seen in this last slide. And thanks again to Kate for joining us, and thank you for everyone joining us in today's webinar.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.